Fascinating time in terms of what will happen in Russia going forward, or in Ukraine to do with Russia. Joining me live for more on this, Associate Professor Matthew Sussex. Thanks for your time. As I said, look, there's a lot going on. Just focusing first of all on the arrest warrant out for Vladimir Putin. Is it just an optics thing, or is this something that will actually make higher ups in the Kremlin worried? Vladimir Putin, I don't think he's not going to get arrested. Let's be realistic, but maybe a whole lot of senior people will be worried that there's a big list of countries they can't travel to now.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. I mean, on the one hand, it is fairly symbolic. No one's going to haul Vladimir Putin out of the Kremlin and send him off to The Hague for war crimes trials. But nonetheless, I think it does send a fairly powerful message that when there are human rights abuses and where there are crimes against humanity, that although the global human rights regime is not as strong as it could be, no one is necessarily safe from indictment and basically shaming in the eyes of the international community. And I think that whereas this will play out in Russian domestic politics in its usual way, already state propagandists have said that anyone who tries to send Putin to The Hague will get nuked. Nonetheless, I think in the eyes of the rest of the international community, it does send a relatively powerful message that these things aren't necessarily tolerated.
The big attention now is on this visit from Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, to Russia. Perhaps this is reductive, but this has seemed to be the three things that will happen in terms of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that President Xi will sort of say, keep doing what you want, sort of not commit either way. He might have a green light and help arm up Russia, or perhaps try to urge Russia that this is not going to end well, perhaps you need to pull back. If that's not too reductive, and feel free to add your own analysis to it, but what do you think is the most likely outcome here?
Oh, look, I think Xi is going for two reasons. One, to demonstrate that, China is providing rhetorical support for Russia, if not material support. And there have been some reports over the last 48 hours or so that China has been supplying body armour as well as small arms to Russia. Now, that's not quite the game changer that it would be if it was supplying artillery shells and precision-guided missiles. But nonetheless, it's indicative, I think, of the pressure that China is under to do more than just show vocal support for Russia. So there's that aspect to it, to say that the so-called no limits partnership between China and Russia is unbroken, and certainly Xi has put out a statement to say that he wants to accelerate cooperation with Russia. The other part is, of course, the Chinese peace plan, the 12-point peace plan, which is very long on aspiration but pretty short on specific details. And the trouble with this, of course, is that it calls for a cessation of hostilities, it calls for both sides to pull back, but ultimately it doesn't say anything about the territory that Russia occupies and has annexed from Ukraine. And so I think, Xi is engaging in a bit of public diplomacy, outward-facing, in terms of how, the people in the West and people in the rest of the world view Chinese diplomacy, promoting himself as a person of peace. But at the same time, he's also quite clearly there to demonstrate that to Vladimir Putin that the relationship between Moscow and Beijing remains pretty strong.
Strong, albeit no limits, seems like not quite the right descriptor, given Russia would want more. Well, so the other thing I think is spoken about a lot is, the power China has. We know how crucial they've been to making sure the Russian economy can basically stay afloat. But if Xi Jinping were to say, in whatever way he did behind closed doors, support's not limitless, I think you should end this, would that happen? Would Vladimir Putin then have to at least begin to formulate the so-called exit ramp we keep talking about?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that Xi Jinping does have influence over Vladimir Putin, but I don't think that it's completely sort of total influence. So, for instance, in the peace plan that the Chinese put out, it said quite clearly that China would not tolerate the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And that's quite a clear message to Moscow that this is a red line that would, result in a withdrawal of Chinese support. And by the same token, that nuclear reactors need to be kept safe and secure. So that type of signalling we've certainly witnessed. But then in terms of the overall pattern of the conflict, if Xi is to say either behind closed doors or publicly, and of course most unlikely to do it publicly, we think this has been going on long enough, time to get out. Putin may well say, look, that's not going to happen, simply because he's staked so much of his domestic political capital on this war ending up as some kind of success for him.
Hey, I wanted to ask you about AUKUS, the submarines mainly, but we know AUKUS encompasses more of that. One of the broad questions from people a bit sceptical of this is, what are we preparing for? And then putting forward the proposition that China would never actually invade the territory of Australia. What do you make of that point in that question, and what do you think nuclear subs do actually deter?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and I think it's actually quite healthy that we're having the debate about it now. It's been a fairly long time coming. It's just my wish that the debate was slightly more than the name calling, which is kind of where we're at the moment. Generally speaking, nuclear submarines are very, very useful because they have long range and they can remain on post for a very long time. So the type of deterrent effect that the AUKUS submarines, when they arrive, will provide for Australia is relatively significant, in that Australia will be able to project power into the region that it really is our economic lifeblood, our sea lanes of communication, as opposed to relying on sort of just the defence of Australia. So in that sense, it does provide, I think, a degree of deterrent capacity. Of course, however, it's going to be a long time before they actually arrive. So we talk about having a deterrent, but we're not going to get that for a number of years. By which time, of course, some of the things that we talk about in terms of China's aspirations may well already have been resolved. And so, whereas if you're in Beijing and you're thinking about, well, what types of plans do we have for regional order? I would have thought invading Australia would be fairly low down the list. You'd have a variety of things that you want to check out off first. And chief amongst those would be to move outside the sort of first island chain and to limit American power rather than Australian power. But once AUKUS comes online, to an extent, I suppose Australian power and American power are increasingly being seen as one and the same thing.
Yeah, and you can, to that end as well, sort of